Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 13th of March 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish, and of course staff still unfortunately suffering with the dreaded Tombola 1C virus, which we've given warnings particularly affects two fat ladies in a full house. But we hope staff will be back online after the weekend. Well, I have got support from Nick Green, who's behind the technical desk, and also I'm going to be joined today by David Scott, reporting from north of the border as Northern Exposure. Well, the weather across the country at the moment is variable, so we have astonishingly sunshine in southeast London and Scotland, but it's wet. Let me see, where's it wet? It's rainy in the northeast, and it's very wet in Manchester. It's pretty grey and gloomy here in Plymouth, but we haven't had any rain yet that I'm aware of. Well, what's happening in UK? First of all, let's have a look at our illustrious leader, David "Our King" Cameron, because his wife Samantha has been saying that she's desperate, absolutely desperate, to get him re-elected as Prime Minister. She's lifted the lid on life inside Downing Street, and she says David is not a bad cook, but he's a little bit messy in the kitchen. But she's very, very keen to get him back as our illustrious King and Prime Minister of Great Britain. But what's the truth? Well, is it the loving couple shown? We'd like to remind people of those who have been funding David Cameron. And we've featured this happy couple before. There's the Bludowitzes who are pumping money not only into David's personal election campaign, some 15,000, but also hundreds of thousands of pounds to the Tory party. And we were particularly offended by the fact that the former arms dealer's wife had held an exhibition of statues with erections, and that included one with Christ with an erection. So if you believe that this is how we should be behaving in Britain, then you will want to vote for David Cameron at the forthcoming election. And life is also beginning to crumble for the Liberal Democrats. First, we had the sex scandal where women were harassed and clearly abused inside the party. That was swept under the carpet quite conveniently by Nick Clegg and his team. However, the Telegraph has been doing some pretty dirty delving into the Lib Dems, and they've been highlighting what's been happening with Liberal Democrat Party member Ibrahim Tagouri, who has been explaining to the Telegraph's undercover reporter how donations would allow him access to exclusive events and senior party figures, etc. So the headlines there: Lib Dem dodgy donations. And now, surprisingly, the police have been asked to investigate potentially illegal contributions. So getting quite interesting. We're slowly but surely seeing the mainstream media turning against all of the mainstream parties. Of course, the key question is, does the mainstream media want to really expose the corruption within Britain's three main political parties? Or is the agenda really to undermine them so that the vote collapses, and that ensures that there will be a hung parliament and thus a super coalition, we are calling it the Rainbow Coalition, can be brought into being? And remember, the moment we end up with a sizable coalition running Britain, we are finally into a one-party state. So we are watching at the moment to see exactly what the press and media are doing, but our feeling is that we've got some very sophisticated manipulation by the main newspapers and, of course, the BBC. Well, we've highlighted over the last couple of days some concerns about defence, and I know that many of our audience simply don't want to talk about defence because they regard this as the aggressive side of Britain. But I think it's true to say that we do need to be able to rely on our services to protect the country. And of course, the key issue is that what the services do comes about by what decisions politicians make. or is that the case? Because it's been flagged up to UK Column that we're now getting an increasing number of people who have never been voted into power who are actually making the decisions behind the scenes as to what happens with Britain's defences and defence industry. And we'll just bring up this gentleman. His name is Malcolm Chalmers. This is taken obviously from his Twitter page. Malcolm is Director of Research at the Royal United Services Institute in London. We're asking, why is this man so powerful in deciding Britain's defence needs? And we're prompted to do this because apparently when he was called recently and asked a question about defence and the name of a particular senior officer was mentioned, it's alleged he put the phone down. But nevertheless, this man is speaking out on all matters to do with defence, and here he is tweeting about mod concerns over health and safety, devolution to Scotland and the impact on nuclear bases. Well, if we have a look at him in a different light, we could perhaps produce this lineup. So we have Malcolm Chalmers, who's been connected into former Home and Foreign Secretary Jack Straw, and Margaret Beckett MP, former Foreign Secretary. Apparently he's been an advisor to those two. And he is, of course, an advisor to the Royal United Services Institute, which is clearly one of the driving quangos helping to dictate David Cameron's defence policy. That links us in quite nicely with the Nuclear Threat Initiative, which is apparently building a safer world. And we were very surprised to see on that website former chair of the Intelligence and Security Committee, Malcolm Rifkin, of course recently sacked for a number of highly dubious business dealings. But we wonder why Malcolm Rifkin would be mixing with actor Michael Douglas on matters to do with nuclear weapons. We might also ask of what his connections were with Gideon Frank, former Director General of the Israel Atomic Energy Commission, and indeed why he'd want to be sitting alongside Ronald Olson, a partner in a very big law firm. And of course, key to what we're bringing up on screen here is that the British public have no idea what discussions and topics did or did not take place because the British public is not privy to the meetings or the minutes of those meetings. And I think that might be a good point to bring in our guest, David Scott, and just say, David, if you'd like to make any comment on that. Obviously, the nuclear defence and deterrent submarine issue is a very big one in Scotland. Over to you.
Yes, it very much is. As a more general point, firstly, the idea that defence policy has been set in a way which is not exactly transparent is obviously very worrying. In the run-up to the First World War, which is obviously the greatest catastrophe really there's ever been for Western civilization, there was secret links between individuals within the British cabinet and military and the French, and secret agreements made that weren't revealed to the cabinet, let alone to the nation, and tended to embroil us in that conflict and also affect the calculations that other players did and perhaps made war more lightly. So I think in these things, as in so many other things, a bit of honesty and clarity would go a long way.
Well, I certainly agree with you on that point, David, but alongside that, what we're hearing is that pressure is really beginning to build now amongst the very senior members of Britain's armed forces. And apparently many, for example, admirals or senior army officers are actually experiencing that their views and opinions on defence are no longer required. So we've got government ministers simply going to these so-called experts within the universities, people who are purely academics. I won't say teachers, but they're purely academics. And we've got Britain's trained military men sidelined, and we've got the government taking opinion from people we really don't know a lot about. So UK Column, we'd like to thank the sources that have started to alert us to this. We do think it's a very sinister event. People unaccountable to the wider British public now beginning to determine defence policy. and indeed are pushing out quite sensitive information about the number of nuclear weapons that Britain holds and the dispersal of those weapons, the reduction of those weapons, and also making comment on the nuclear submarine deterrent. We'll continue to report on that. Probably that would lead us in quite nicely, though, to recent reports by Patrick Henningsen of 21st Century Wire. And he has produced an excellent article starting to point out the links between some of the agencies which the British government would say are out-and-out terrorist agencies in Syria. And Patrick is actually saying that something very dirty is going on here because we can now see that the Free Syrian Army, al-Nusra and ISIS elements are now collaborating and going in one direction, and that is to topple the existing Syrian regime under Assad. And as Patrick Henningsen says, and that's what Saudi Arabia, Israel, Washington and London wants. Now, having commented on this, we should remember that it was Tory MP Brooks Newmark, the man taking pictures of himself naked in his bathroom. It was that very same Conservative MP that was busy saying he would have to apologise to General Idris for his failure to get Britain to rain bombs down on Assad. So only months ago, the British government was actively supporting Free Syria Army. We were being warned against al-Nusra and ISIS. And all of a sudden, we can see these terrorists now acting in a coordinated way to achieve just the policy which, of course, David Cameron has stood on a world stage and claimed, and that is we need to remove Assad. So as the UK column has said on many occasions, if we add up the conduct of the British government, we have seen Britain and America with unlawful attacks on Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and Syria now in the spotlight. Well, what can we do about this? Most of it is to do with education and informing the public. And we'll just give you a reminder that the British Constitution Group is continuing to push out videos from the conference at the weekend. Due to some technical problems, Guy Taylor's talk on the fraudulent action of British courts did not go out yesterday, so it will go out today. Many apologies for that. But if you're new to the British Constitution Group, or indeed you support but haven't seen these talks, we'd encourage you to do so because they are really taking the lid off the criminality, fraud and corruption, not only at the heart of Britain's political establishment, but also within the courts, the very courts that we rely on for law and justice in Britain. On a lighter note, we put up a slide yesterday asking for the identity of the mystery doodler at the conference who had drawn what I considered to be a pretty accurate and wonderful warship. Well, we didn't know whether we'd get any replies, but we were very surprised by the person who came forward to say that he had drawn it. And let's have a look. We'll bring him up next to his wonderful doodle, but it was none other than our very own, here he is, Justin Walker. And what I find fascinating is, of course, Justin's former trade was as an army officer. And, well, in my own experience, army officers are not normally sure which end of a ship is which. But we're going to say, well done, Justin. Perhaps we should put him in as Minister of Defence once we get the country sorted out. We'd also like to thank the lady that was kind enough to send us thousands of business cards. Here's an example. And this is wonderful support. It makes a big difference to us to see that people are thinking of us. And this was a wonderful an idea which has allowed us to spread the word of UK Column far and wide. So thank you very much for that. Well, I'll say to David, we're going to move into the heart of the beast now, because the subject, as always, is child abuse. We make no apologies for sticking on this very dark subject, because simply, if we cannot trust Britain's politicians and senior policemen to deal with the abuse of our own children, of course, we can't rely on British politicians and police to deal with any other matter. And it is becoming increasingly clear that the abuse of children is not only on an industrial scale, but we are now seeing more and more senior British politicians, whether it's David Cameron or Nick Clegg at the top of the tree, prepared to help cover up the truth about the abuse of children. Well, who could be more appropriate to bring on screen at this point than our very own Francis Maude, Conservative Cabinet Minister. He also is responsible for transparency in the Tory party. And it's taken Sky News to bring up the fact that under Francis Maude's hand, 4 files to do with abuse are being held back. Francis Maude says, well, basically he's not going to name the files or actually tell us what's in them. So this is effectively a transparent cover-up. But we've seen him do the same thing with common purpose deals connected to the Cabinet Office. Now I'm going to suggest it's equally as serious, excuse me, with child abuse. But what the Conservatives are doing is obfuscating, they're blurring issues, and by doing that, they are protecting child abusers. And here we are, they're refusing to disclose the contents or even the titles of the files. So that's it at the top of the Tory party, protection of child abusers. But let's have a look about this particular policeman. We've got top cop, as the Mail says, Hogan Howe. He says there should be a grown-up conversation about tackling decades-old issues. Now, wonderful example of nudging and spin there, because we're going to talk about the issue. We're not actually going to do anything about it. We're simply going to talk about it. And in any case, it's decades old. We don't really even need to talk about it because it all happened a long time ago. So let's have a look at some of the things that basically he said. He said he will never shrink from the task of bringing a bad person justice, whoever they are, without fear or favour, unless it concerns the allegation of child abuse, we think. So hypocrisy by this man. Ben Fellows was told point blank that the police would not investigate senior politicians. Nottingham police have stalked, harassed and terrified child abuse victim Melanie Shaw. Cheshire police officers collaborated with Police Scotland to steal vital evidence from the home of child abuse campaigner Robert Green. And of course, more recently, Met police officers were threatened by other police to stay silent about the Hampstead child abuse case. So we're going to say, Hogan Howe, you are a hypocrite and disingenuous police officer because we know the scale of the corruption, and we know that not only are Britain's police forces involved in the child abuse, they are prepared to intimidate people trying to expose it. And the ITV News here is giving another bit of gentle nudging, because here's Rochdale and the police are, well, they're apologising. We've made terrible failures, so we're going to apologise. We're not actually going to get out on the streets and find the perpetrators of the crime. We are simply going to apologise. And it gets better in this ITV report because we are told that no police officers are to face misconduct proceedings over the Rochdale child sex abuse scandal, to which we say utter corruption within Britain's police. And David, I'll call you in again. It's just in your face. Something is very wrong with policing in Britain as a whole.
Yes, it is. We're seeing a tendency, no one's ever to blame for anything, and the multitude of agencies seems to make it all the easier. The blame always lies somewhere else. There's no prosecution because the Crown Office or the CPS in England decides not to, but the responsibility for that falls somewhere between them and the police, and no one's ever to blame. No one ever loses their job, let alone faces criminal charges when they behave in an unlawful manner. We need to change that.
And we need to agree, we need to change it very fast, because what we can see, if we take Guy Taylor for example, and all his work showing utter fraud and corruption in courts, falsified documents, documents not signed or stamped. That's one area of the law. But here we've got police officers. Really what they're doing is lying to the public in order to cover up child abuse. Do these police officers lie? Well, of course, we know from the recent exposure of the Hillsborough inquiry, a police officer has finally, after 26 years, admitted the lie around the Hillsborough disaster. So the police prepared to lie over 96 people dying at a disaster at a football match. The police prepared to lie over the abuse of children and to cover up. What it's really telling us is, of course, that the country is being run by paedophiles, the same paedophiles that have been using the child protection system to procure their victims. Well, of course, not all police officers are bad, and we have never said that's the case. And let's bring on screen one of the good guys. So here we are. We've got a South Yorkshire policeman, Tony Brooks, a former police constable with 30 years service, and he's claiming that the force knew that girls as young as 12 years old were being raped and assaulted, but chose to ignore it. So he's describing malfeasance in public office, misconduct in public office, and of course assisting the rape and abuse of children, criminal offences. This needs to be dealt with, but at the moment we've got Home Secretary Theresa May simply appointing a so-called investigation panel of 4 people, including her friendly fellow judges. So this is an utter disgrace. How Britain can stand on the world stage and preach to other countries is beyond me. British public has got to deal with this by exposing exactly what's going on. And can this be done? Well, it can. Let's bring you to the Sheffield City region. If that title doesn't fill you with alarm, well, it should, because this is the start of Agenda 21. This is the start of the super city states, as Mike Robinson has said, the feudal system where we are to be run by a city region. But who we're interested in here? Well, we're interested in this man, John Mothersole, the Chief Executive Officer of Sheffield Council. And of course, he's busy talking to Nick Clegg. Well, why are we interested in this man? It's because he's accused of the cover-up of abuse. And of what better man to meet and talk to than Lib Dem leader Nick Clegg, who ran away from child abuse campaigner Bill Maloney outside Westminster many months ago. So what's been going on? Well, let's bring in this email that we were sent in the last couple of days. So it's an email that was sent through to John Mothersole. Let's have a look at what it actually says. I know there's a lot of words on screen. I shall read through. Whilst the ongoing abuses of myself by this council are my burden to bear, I draw the line at the abuses of vulnerable women, especially when the abuses are on behalf of the council. Whether it's a woman dying of cancer who received a wreath and an insultive note on her last birthday, or a woman sent an obscene poison pen letter on the day of an important meeting, or a woman subjected to threats and a publicly humiliating cowboy trial, a popular council tactic, or a woman subjected to racist and misogynist abuses, or a group of elderly women bullied into submission under threat of public excoriation, or more recently, vulnerable women who have been repeatedly and systematically abused in several ways for over the past 3 years. The common factor is always that the abusers include council officers supported by elected members. Yes, the cover-up of abuses even extends to abuse of minors. In every invited case that I've seen, the council were fully aware of what was and is happening, yet the council's approach is always to deny and lie. Meanwhile, those who deny and lie and cover up while the abuses continue receive council protection, if not praise and reward. I do not have to give you details, as the council already has them. I note that today, as the child sexual exploitation tsunami now engulfs Sheffield, as was predicted, it is incredulous that council officers have still denied the abuses and, if expectations are correct, will still deny the abuses, for example, of the recently abused vulnerable women community volunteers. It is expected that there will be yet another denial, not least by the creation of another fabrication, no doubt assisted by a department instructed to exercise damage limitation. I shall be reporting on the events of last week at full council and incorporating those observations within my next blog. I note that today, the 12th of March 2014, there have been more disclosures of child sexual exploitation cover-ups in Sheffield, only another 300 plus, which the police have known about for a decade. It is clear that the council and police are acting together. This applies not just to child sexual exploitation, but to any potentially embarrassing incident. As you are aware, especially in but not limited to my case, the abuses were prevalent, if not de rigueur, during the tenure of your predecessor, John. In return, the police take pleasure in protecting the council when suppressing corruption, even to the point of blatantly lying to the Independent Police Complaints Commission and members of the public, and as with the child sexual exploitation, instructing officers not to investigate the abuses of the vulnerable women adults. And we're going to thank the gentleman very much for sending that in. And I will say to our audience today, this man has done a huge amount, often totally alone, many occasions with a few people to help him, to expose the terrible fraud and corruption around Sheffield Council, not only to do with millions of pounds of public money fraudulently squandered, but also, as he's clearly saying, warning of the abuse of children. And remember, that email was actually sent back in 2014, and he was telling the council then of the abuse of some 300 individuals. David, it's quite astonishing, isn't it, the speed at which truth's coming up to the surface. Another one of our big cities. Is it any wonder that we've seen trouble around Holly Gregg up in Aberdeen, for example?
Yes, I mean, it's been a remarkable year. I was discussing with Robert, when I could discuss such things with Robert, that when he was arrested, which was in February 2014, it was almost a different world. There was no publicity for most of the child sex allegations. There was no exposure of Rotherham, Cyril Smith, Savile. There was nothing. It was a completely different media environment. People tended not to believe you because the story seemed so outlandish. It seemed so far from what they had experienced in their lives. Well, we don't find that anymore. People believe us now because they're seeing from Sheffield, from Rotherham, from all cities all over the country. Glasgow may well have a similar problem to Rotherham. They're seeing these stories repeated time and time again, and they're seeing cover-up, and they're seeing failure at the very highest level of police and politicians.
Yes, and of course the other thing we've seen on many occasions is that the mainstream media simply won't report. They either show initial interest and then drag their heels and nothing happens, or they claim they can't report because of legal proceedings, or they say they can't report because their own legal teams are telling them not to. And the result of this, of course, is that our press and media are also actively involved in the cover-up of the abuse of children. Well, let's have a look at this article, which tells us that Max Clifford has been picked up by the police again. Remember that he's in prison at the moment, jailed for 8 years after being convicted of indecent assaults. But he's apparently been taken to a Peterborough police station for further questioning about other sexual offences. Now, this is, of course, extremely worrying because it would appear that more's been going on behind the scenes. But we'd like to thank one of our viewers who said, were we aware that back in 2012, Max Clifford was building a mainstream TV media network with links to top IT executives. And here's the article from Broadcast. It says that Max Clifford was hiring Rumsey to form Indie. PR guru Max Clifford is launching a production company that will be headed by former Daybreak chief Ian Rumsey. Exclusive TV, a division of Max Clifford Associates, will tap into the PR consultancy's portfolio of celebrities, which includes Simon Cowell, Kerry Katona, and a variety of other stars that I'm not really interested in. But it is fascinating that so little of this appears in the mainstream press, that individuals embedded in our media organisations, of course, where they gain great power in what does and what does not get reported. So I'm going to say thank you very much to the person that sent that information through to us. We'll be having a look a little bit deeper to see what was going on there with Max Clifford and some of his side companies. Well, how does the British state treat people who've been abused within the so-called childcare system? There couldn't be a better example than Robert Greene, who we'll be coming on to, but also this lady, Melanie Shaw. She stands up to report her own abuse and that of some 150 other youngsters in Beechwood Home, Nottingham. What does the British state do? David Cameron, supposedly a Christian, and his sidekick Theresa May, well, they put her back into a particularly vicious profit-making prison run by Sodexo in Peterborough. We said over the last few days we'd had no communication from Melanie. Well, today a letter arrived. This is part of that letter. But in it, Melanie says this: Brian, hope you're well. I'm being denied medication, food, clean clothes, bedding, showers or baths, towels, etc. I'm being abused. It's sick. It's like Nazi Germany. HM Prison, Peterborough, Sodexo. So we are not surprised by this. Melanie, of course, told us that this was the sort of treatment meted out to her last time: solitary confinement, a serious leg ulcer not treated, denial of her normal medication, bullying by Sodexo staff. And I can tell our audience that despite extensive letters, emails and phone calls by a number of experienced people to get some sort of investigation into Melanie's treatment at the hands of Sodexo, NHS England and of course Sodexo itself have simply failed to take any investigative action at all. Home Secretary Theresa May, we think, is sitting smiling because it's clear the British state wants Melanie silenced. But this is the reality of it. It's quite horrific stuff, David.
It certainly is. The abuse is everywhere, and the failure of the authorities who should be standing up for the victim, standing up for the innocent, and standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves is also everywhere. We're seeing this repeated over and over again. We saw it at the recent UK Column Conference, stories that came out again and again, where the most compelling, the most obvious, the most clear evidence that said a crime had been committed, or that a crime had been committed by a police officer or someone else in authority, could be presented, and it just never seemed to be enough. Evidence, logic, reason never seemed to be enough.
Yeah. For me, Melanie's case is just so straightforward that after a successful defence, as it were, by the British public, Melanie was free, living in her own home. And then what she described over a number of weeks was brutal intimidation and harassment by Nottinghamshire police, including smashing their way into her home on 2 occasions. Was there any care or nurturing or support for this very vulnerable child abuse victim? Absolutely none, just vicious behaviour by another one of Britain's police forces. Now, somebody in our chat room has said there really is no excuse for police who knew or know what's going on but don't speak out. I do agree with that, but I'm also going to say we know, of course, from events around the 2 children in Hampstead, that police officers were seriously threatened by other Metropolitan Police officers to stay out of that case. And of course, when we've got to the state where people are being threatened physically, we know some people have had their families threatened. Speaking out is not easy. The important thing for the British public is that when people do become whistleblowers, we need to give them all the support we can. Well, if we go north of the border, we had a report from Sky News about the TV weatherman, and many people remember this famous scene of him standing on a floating map of UK, and this gentleman is being sentenced on Friday after he was found guilty last month of indecently assaulting 2 schoolboys in Manchester in the mid-1970s. And apparently he used to lure boys onto a canal boat and get them in bed. But isn't it interesting that what is the media concentrating on? Not the abuse that is going on around Westminster, Elm House, for example, in London. We're distracting people by these assaults going back into the 1970s. And meanwhile, of course, Robert Greene will continue to tell people is totally gagged by the Scottish government for speaking out at all on the matter of the abuse of Holly Gregg. And he's also gagged for speaking out on any other child abuse case in Scotland. And the gag is for life, and it's worldwide. I don't know whether, David, you'd like to just add a bit to that situation. I know you've commented on it before.
Yes, please. One item that the Fred Talbot case highlights is the fact that child abuse and child abuse networks do not stop at Hadrian's Wall. We have a child abuse inquiry in Scotland, not started yet, but it's promised, and we have a child abuse inquiry in England that's kind of stuttering along and hasn't really hit anything like a high gear. We have to make sure that the demarcation between these two doesn't become a point where information slips away and perpetrators slip away. And I think there's a real risk of that. In Scotland, there is more and more evidence coming forward as well that that people like Savile have been abusing children in Scotland. We have multiple cases of people accusing Nicholas Fairbairn of abuse, and Nicholas Fairbairn, as you know, crops up in the Elm Guesthouse register in quite frequently. So we need to make sure that the links down from Scotland all the way down to Westminster are tied up, and we see exactly what's happening across the whole country.
Okay, thank you. David, a question in the chat room at the moment is simply how can a Scottish court impose a gagging order which operates worldwide? What's your reply to that?
That's an excellent question. We're not actually quite sure. What's happened is the Scottish courts have decided that if you publish anything on the internet, you put a YouTube video that can be downloaded in Scotland, that's the same as publishing in Scotland, or essentially putting on a live event in Scotland. If you, Robert put a blog up on the internet from England, and it was debatable whether that was published in Scotland, even though you could download it in Scotland. What did for him, and the reason he had to plead guilty, is that he sent an email to someone in Scotland with a link to his blog to say, have a look at this. That was deemed to be publishing in Scotland. So the stretch of the Scottish courts to cover essentially the whole of the world via the World Wide Web, if it can be downloaded in Scotland and is therefore published in Scotland, is completely nonsensical. If we apply that to every other nation, then the internet ceases to function, because you would be bound by the laws of North Korea if you're talking about North Korea, and they could sneak in and lift you out of your home if they were to apply the Robert Greene standard to their own particular situation. It doesn't make any sense. England is a completely different jurisdiction, legally speaking, from Scotland. It's a foreign land in terms of legality from Scotland, just as France is, just as the United States, anywhere else in the globe. The Scottish courts have really overreached themselves. It's certainly a very worrying situation. If they can claim jurisdiction everywhere in the world, then so can everybody else. And at that point, freedom of speech is a thing of the past.
Indeed. Unfortunately, I can't remember the legal officer's name, but of course we've reported before about Staffordshire County Council in one particular child case were trying to force the hand of senior family division Judge Mumby to get a worldwide injunction around a case. And for those in court, Judge Mumby was reacted with I can't really describe it, but his question to Staffordshire County Council is, do you seriously expect me to censor the worldwide internet? But the point is that people within Staffordshire County Council seem to believe that this was possible. And the particular legal officer who'd driven the case from the background had produced paperwork which UK Column showed, where he was saying, well, really, never mind Westminster, we should make up the law. So we seem to be seeing more of the same. It's not really law, it's something being made up on the hoof by people to cover their tracks. And we showed this a little while ago, which was the Daily Record pointing out that Police Scotland were under attack because they were simply not releasing information to the public and also members of the Scottish Parliament. Now, this is very, very serious because what it shows us is we've got a secret police in Scotland at least.
Yes, this is... Police Scotland are in a lot of trouble in a lot of ways. A senior police officer who's currently on suspension for speaking out and apparently also got into trouble for not wearing a hat and some poor form filling. And I'm not making that up, that's actually true. Has actually gone public now and claimed that the Chief Constable, Sir Stephen House, lied to Parliament around whether or not there are quotas to be filled for stopping and searching people. The Scottish police have recently come into some more disrepute where they have a monthly customer satisfaction survey. They go and poll the people of Scotland. How happy are you with your police force? And we're all very happy, it would appear. It then transpired that the people they were polling are only those reporting crimes, not the public at large and not the people who interact with the police at large. So all of the people who are walking down the street going about their lawful business and are stopped and searched by a police officer, probably quite frequently, because the same people will get stopped again and again because they'll meet certain criteria. They're not polled about how happy they are with Police Scotland. So they can't even do an opinion poll that is straight.
Well, this is the same as we've really just covered with Hogan Howell, the disingenuousness of the police. But you picked up a couple of articles here which you thought would be good to cover south of the border. So we've got the Daily Express, deficit blow for Sturgeon. And there's one we're going to bring in with it from the National, prophets of doom. Unionist politicians insist Scotland isn't smart enough to control its own economy. What's going on here, David?
Yes, the first one, the Daily Express have highlighted this, and it shows not only the problem in Scotland, it shows the problem for the whole United Kingdom, which is we're broke. The government are spending our money like it's going out of fashion, and the situation is not really getting better at any significant rate. So we've now got Scotland is 12.4 billion with a B in the red. There's a 12.4 billion deficit. This is more per head of population than in Britain as a whole. And although in Scotland, including the oil money, the tax take is £400 a head more than England, the spend is £1,200 more than England. This is a serious problem for Nicola Sturgeon and the Nationalist government, because in any rational approach to economics, then an independent Scotland would have to slash the size of the state, which would be a good thing, considering what they're doing. You know, identity cards, names, person, doubtful police practices and all the rest of it. You know, a smaller state would help us a lot, but they don't want to do that. They're only interested in growing the state. So the other paper you saw there was a nationalist supporting paper called The Nation.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting, quite a nice paper. It's sort of like Pravda for Scottish people, and they cover the same ground, but all of a sudden the fact that we're spending £1,200 per head of population more than we're bringing in tax, it doesn't seem to be a problem anymore. There's just evidence of how vibrant the Scottish economy is, and they're talking about how if you say anything against the Scottish economy, you're saying something against the nation, the people of Scotland. You're being somehow anti-patriotic and anti-Scottish. This is not true. What we have is a real live economic crisis, a real live government out of control in Scotland and in England, and we need to do something about it, and we need to be able to ask and answer the right questions about what government should do, what they shouldn't do, and how much tax they should take to do it.
Okay, well, I've got an eye on the clock here, David. We're running a little bit over, but I'm going to continue because I think we're into some pretty serious news reporting here. But we'll have to just go a little bit quickly, I think. So I've got another article, The Times. This is Scottish Times. And we've got a number of articles. Terrorism is a price worth paying, says Liberty Lobby. Scotland, home of the world's finest tea. And down at the bottom, an interesting little one. SNP wants to block military action as price of Labour deal. So what's going on here?
Yes, the last time I supported Alex Salmond was when he was opposing some war somewhere. I think it was the Balkans. He actually came into a lot of political flack for not wanting to bomb Serbia. And one of the best things about him is he was quite brave about that. I hope what the SNP are saying is an end to unnecessary illegal wars overseas. I fear what it might be is that, well, Britain is too weak to engage in this, and we want to throw our sovereignty into a wider European state. I'm not sure which it is yet. I have my concerns.
And what's your opinion on Scottish tea?
Scottish tea is, of course, the finest tea in the world because it just won the top prize in some competition in Paris for the best tea. It's the tea in question has grown just a few miles from where I sit, and I didn't know there was a tea plantation there. But the place is called Amulree, and I'll be sure to get some and try it.
Well, David, we'd love to try it as well, and I'm sure it would be especially nice with a wee drammy in it.
I'll send you some.
Okay, we better move on from that subject, though. I've got one more article. This is about Mother's landmark legal win over birth errors.
Yes, this is very interesting. This was a Lanarkshire mother who had a baby at a major maternity hospital called Bells Hill. Unfortunately, there was a complication during the birth. The baby was starved of oxygen and was born with severe brain damage. There's now been a big award, and the interesting thing is that it's moved the medical negligence law for the whole of the country to a point where, quote, doctors will have to discuss with their patients the options that exist in their treatment and advise them about the alternatives and any associated risks. I must admit, I was a little bit surprised to find that that was not currently the case, but it is going to be the case. It seems to have moved the requirement for informed consent and the authority for making decisions very distinctly from the medical professional to the patient, which is where it should be. Okay.
Well, we're going to end back on the subject of Robert Greene, but really from the angle that when people get going and get on the case of the authorities, really tremendous things happen. And I hope I've got this one right. This is the famous Squiggle letter, which has been sent by a lady called Gillian Swanson to the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Office. And it's dated the 8th of March. I know the text is very small on screen.
I'll read it out if I may, because it's a joyful thing. We call this Squigglegate in Scotland. The person, there's a person in the Crown Office who is answering letters on Holly Greig and won't give his or her name, and the signature isn't legible. So this is what Gillian said. Dear Squiggle, open letter. Your claim that the Crown Office has fulfilled its duty in relation to the Holly Greig case. Thank you for your email, 5th of March, in reply to my letters to Ms. Katrina Dalrymple and Ms. Helen Knipe. Firstly, I believe that in order to ensure correspondents know exactly whom they are dealing with, it is a legal requirement that those unable to write their signature clearly should supplement it with a printed version. Despite the fact that you have identified yourself only with a wavy line and have failed to add any printed interpretation, I will therefore assume that I am continuing to address Ms. Dalrymple in her capacity as Head of Policy at the Crown Office and to hold her personally responsible for the opinions stated. I don't actually think that Squiggle is Katrina Dalrymple. I think Squiggle's somebody else, but they're not admitting who they are. The letter goes on. With regard to your continuing assertion that the Holly Greig case has been thoroughly investigated, I would ask you to confirm the following assumptions which follow inevitably from this claim. 1. When a case of rape is reported, you, as a representative of the Crown Office, do not believe it is necessary for the police to question the alleged perpetrators without delay. 2. When a case of rape is reported, you, as a representative of the Crown Office, do not believe it is necessary for the police to immediately search the homes of those named for corroborative evidence. 3. When a case of rape is reported, you, as a representative of the Crown Office, do not believe it is necessary to seize and examine the computers of those named at the earliest opportunity. 4. When allegations of rape are supported by evidence from well-respected medical and psychological experts who unanimously confirm not only that systematic abuse has taken place, but go so far as to name 2 of the most likely perpetrators, you, as a representative of the Crown Office, believe it is right to dismiss their testimony and allow those named to leave the country. 5. When a doctor twice reports an underage girl to be at risk, and the girl's headmaster, one of those subsequently named as a serial rapist, consistently fails to alert the child's mother or to take any steps to protect her, you, as a representative of the Crown Office, believe this is the normal behaviour of a responsible and guiltless person. 6. When a case of rape is reported by a girl with speech difficulties, you, as a representative of the Crown Office, do not believe it is necessary to supply her with support during police interviews, but are happy to use her handicap in this respect to discredit her spoken evidence. 7. When a case of repeated multiple gang rape over many years is reported by a young girl who also names 7 fellow victims, you, as a representative of the Crown Office, do not believe that in the view of the Scottish law regarding corroboration, it is absolutely essential that the police question those she has named immediately. 8. When an acknowledged victim of rape receives a substantial award from the Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority, you, as a representative of the Crown Office, feel justified in continuing to maintain the allegations on which this award are based were fully investigated and found to be false. She goes on a little bit, but that's the guts of it, and it really shows how ridiculous, utterly ridiculous, the Crown Office Procurator Fiscal Service position over the Holly Greig case is, and that is why it will not go away.
Well, thank you for that, David. And we're going to say here, this is what people can do. The power of the pen is quite extraordinary when people stay reasonable, focused, and simply pull out the sheer nonsense that's been coming out of the Crown Office in Scotland over this case. And, well, we're going to say well done, Gillian Swanson, on that. I have actually got the reply from the Procurator Fiscal's office, which I can bring up on screen. I don't know whether you can just briefly comment on that one, David. I
think that's the one. That's the wavy line. That's Squiggle.
That's Squiggle.
That's Squiggle. I've had letters from Squiggle as well, and when you write back to Squiggle and say, "Excuse me, you have to sign the letter and put your name," somebody else presumably Squiggle's boss, writes back. That's Katrina Dalrymple. Katrina Dalrymple's okay to go on the record, but Squiggle is, for some reason, unwilling to actually record his or her name when writing about the Holly Gregg case.
Yeah, and I'll just say for the people who are asking the question in the chat box, we do understand that somebody's signature is their signature. The point we're making here is that there's no text to identify the person, hence the Squiggle gate.
This is not a one-off. This is not someone's forgot to put their name on one particular letter. This comes out time and time again when we're asking them questions about Holly Gregg. This unidentifiable Squiggle replies. This is not acceptable.
Okay, of course, it might not be a squiggle. It could be a snake. I'll leave you to think about that one. David, thank you very much for joining us. I'll say to all our viewers and listeners, Britain is in an extremely dangerous state at the moment. It's clear we're being attacked by a fifth column operating across all of the main political parties. The aim is to break this country up. It is to reduce society to absolute chaos. Why would they want to do that? It's very simple. That is how you gain control of a nation. And if we don't stand up to be counted and speak out, what is being formed very quickly with an agenda, of course, on the May election is a dictatorship. Can we stop it? Yes. How do we stop it? By millions of people withdrawing their consent and taking action, however small that action is. We don't need violence. What we do need to do is keep people together, working as friends and neighbours within communities. And whatever the background, the people we're up against simply don't care a jot for any of us, so it doesn't make any difference what your religion is, colour, whether you're north of the border, south of the border, in Wales, Ireland, whatever. But the truth is a double-edged sword, so we need the truth and we need exposure, and that is indeed what started to happen. If you are in contact and know policemen and women, start to talk to them. If you know judges, barristers and lawyers, talk to them and spread the word wherever you can. Journalists are beginning to wake up. We know some of them are starting to get quite spooked as they're getting visits by the police simply for making a phone call trying to get a story out. So don't throw all of the journalists out with the bathwater. We need to be encouraging the ones who are showing the bravery to speak out. And if you're listening to us overseas, as we frequently do, the UK column would like to apologise to nations overseas who have suffered at the hands of the British government, whether it is Conservative, Labour, Lib Dem or a collaboration. We don't condone their actions, but it's going to take us a little bit of time to clean up their act within this country. So there we are. We're going to end on a positive note. We do need proper change in Britain. We need to get good people into Westminster. We can do it. Recharge your batteries over the weekend. And if you haven't tasted it, have a look on the supermarket shelves for some of that special Scottish tea. Okay, David, thanks for joining us. And we'll be back on Monday, same time, 1 o'clock. Thank you. Bye-bye.